43 degrees. I incorrectly said 48 a couple of minutes ago. Chance of a thunderstorm or two today, and showers in the forecast, not particularly warm, about 53. Looks like by Thursday, though, we're going to see a little clearing, but otherwise, pretty much through Sunday, we're just going to see clouds and showers. Yesterday morning, we had Joe Piscianeri on in this particular segment. He is running for House District number 12. This morning, we have the man who is challenging him. It is John Lively joining us on the Wake-Up Call this morning at News Radio 1120 KPNW. Good morning, John. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about your background. Besides being the mayor of Springfield a couple of times and a city councilman there, you've kind of held a variety of different positions around the community, not only in the private sector, but also in the public sector. Just give us a couple of the high points.
Sure. Well, I've spent most of my professional career, I've worked in the private sector, working in manufacturing jobs, worked for a decade in economic development, managed contact centers and call centers, and then most recently working in marketing. And as a volunteer, I've served on the hospital board, worked with the school boards on different issues, the Lane Workforce Partnership and workforce issues for many issues, United Way board, so the list is pretty broad. I've always tried to be involved in a lot of different issues and help my community in any way I could.
All right. Let's talk about kind of some of the things that you want to do if you are elected to the House. Give us kind of an idea of your priority checklist.
Sure. First and foremost, from my perspective, and this has been true for a long time, remains true, unfortunately, is the whole area of jobs. Because there needs to be more jobs developed and encouraged in the private sector so that people can get back to work, or those that are underemployed can be working at better jobs, frankly. Because through more people working and the unemployment rate going down is how, in some cases, we're going to address the revenue issue, because more people will be able to pay the taxes that they normally would be paying if they're working. So jobs certainly is important. Second area priority is public education, and I mean that in the broadest sense, from before kindergarten all the way through higher education, and the way that we fund and support that and make it available to students is critically important, and we're not doing a very good job right now. And the third,
can I just interrupt you briefly on that particular point? When you say we're not doing a good job right now, of course, the governor is going through kind of a, if you will, a retooling of education here in the state of Oregon. Do you think that what he's doing is a good thing or not?
Yeah, no, I generally support the focus where it's going. There's some details, discussion points, especially with higher education, whether that would necessarily be where we go. But I think that the course that's been set is a good course. The key issue still is going to remain how we pay for it and how we do that and not diminish some of what we're already doing. And I think that's something we don't know yet.
Okay. So, sorry to interrupt you there. Go ahead and with the rest.
No problem. And the other area is healthcare, our healthcare costs. And again, the state, I think, is headed down a course that's a good course at this time to look at providing more access to people for health care. I'm a true believer if we don't get a handle on people being healthy, we're never going to solve the cost on the other end. So access to health care and what we're starting down, but I don't think yet we really understand enough about how we're going to control the cost to pay for the system in the long term, and so we've got to do more focus on that.
The man who was challenging you for the job, Joe Piscianeri, the Republican, also yesterday when we talked to him made quite a point about developing jobs. What is the difference between the two of you in the way that you're going to go about developing those jobs?
Well, I think there's two areas. First, I just think it's experience. And so I've spent my life working in the private sector and in many cases working with companies to make investments and to create jobs, and I understand it from that perspective. I also understand it from the perspective of having worked in economic development for a decade and on the board for another decade. And so I think our approach would be a little bit different just from the standpoint of understanding what it takes. The key ingredient is timing and making sure the system works so that businesses can make a quick decision and get in there, and I believe we've got to do some corrections to our land use laws to make them more predictable. I'm also just a strong believer that infrastructure is important, and in the near term, government investment in infrastructure does create jobs. It creates opportunities for companies making these supplies and things, but in the long term is the thing that also is a big incentive for businesses to make investments.
What aspects of infrastructure are you talking about spending government funds on?
I think, again, the things the government already spends it on. So it's roads, it's bridges, it's streets, it's sewer, it's water system. It's all those things that help make our communities and our state a great place and create the opportunity for us to move goods and services and people. And in many cases, those are falling apart or they need repairs. And they're critical, again, to businesses. Businesses look strongly at that type of infrastructure before making investments. And so that's the type of thing government should spend their money on, but understand all of those are done through contracts with the private sector, and the sand and gravel operators and others depend on those jobs in many cases and those contracts for their living.
One of the things, and you kind of brought it up a little bit when you got into the issue of public education, had to do with funding. One of the things that your opponent says is that, you're in favor of increasing taxes and fees. Go ahead and respond to that.
That's easy for him to say. That's hard for him to be able to prove at this point. What I'm in favor of is first understanding that we do need to make more investment in public education. And so what that means in the near term is getting people back to work so that the revenues in the state that come from income tax increase so we have some opportunities to make some more investments. In the longer term, we need to look at our whole tax structure and decide how we're going to even it out from the ups and downs we're having and build the rainy day fund. And I am a believer that part of that conversation has to be what other forms of taxes and that can we look at that would be a part of the overall solution. But I'm certainly not in the near term suggesting raising fees or taxes any more than my opponent does when he raises those fees on businesses in Springfield through system development charges and those things. Those are just things you have to look at, but that's not in the near term.
Are you in favor of a sales tax?
I have historically been in favor of sales tax. I don't know if that's part of the solution. Again, what I'm in favor of is that being the consumption tax being part of the long-term discussion of how we solve the revenue problem in the state of Oregon.
So in the past, when you've been in favor of a sales tax, what about other taxes, Oregon income tax and property taxes? My approach has been, and understand in the past when I was in favor was 1984. That's been a few years ago, and the conditions are very different today than they were then. But here's my approach to taxes. If indeed we're going to talk about a consumption tax or a sales tax, we got to talk about what the balance is then with the income tax or the property tax. The limitations, the elimination of. Again, I don't have the answers to that, but I understand and respect the voters don't want just another tax on top that continues to grow along with the taxes that are there, and I respect that and certainly wouldn't propose that. Okay. Just out of curiosity, a couple of ballot measures. One of them would get rid of the estate tax. In favor, against?
I'm against that.
You're against that. Why?
Yes.
Why are you against that?
I'm against anything in the near term that takes further funds away from a state that already is in an economic challenge time, meaning that we don't have enough revenues to support the basic service and certainly education. So I'm not in favor of just arbitrarily getting rid of anything that's in place now until we have the bigger conversation. So what is the long-term solution and what's the right mixture of taxes?
Your feelings about eliminating the corporate kicker?
Well, I'm in favor of eliminating both the corporate kicker and the individual, and certainly the ballot measure right now would do that, and in theory would create more funds for education. I support that. Okay.
And I think it's ballot measure 79 that has to do with transfer taxes on real estate. We don't currently tax that. I guess Multnomah County does. Or pardon me, Washington County. Your feelings on that? It would make sure or ensure that never occurred. Your feelings?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of that either. From the standpoint again of quote eliminating the opportunity to look at that as a potential source for communities or others at some point if that's what the community decide to do. Now, when nobody's attempting to do it. But more importantly, in the long term, again, I don't believe we should at the state level be restricting local communities and what their opportunities are for them and their local citizens to make decisions about how they fund those services.
Democrat John Lively joining us on the Wake-Up Call this morning. He is running for House District seat number 12 against, of course, Joe Piccionary, who was on at exactly this time yesterday. We thought it would be a good idea to have his opponent, John, on as well. One of the things that's currently being debated in Salem has to do with the issue of public safety and, in particular, our prisons. One of the things that Joe Piccionary said about you yesterday is that you were in favor of releasing, more dangerous criminals out into the streets than we currently do. Now's your chance to respond.
again, I'm never sure where he gets that information that he uses, but I've never once said I was in favor of releasing more dangerous criminals. What I said I'm in favor of is looking at the system, and again, potentially considering what our mandatory sentences are. In some cases, they may not be correct, but the goal, what I'm really in favor of, is getting back to preventing or working to treat up front and make sure we're not putting people in prison. And frankly, education is one of the ways we do that. If we're not educating people and providing opportunities, then I can tell you the cost at the other end of putting in prisons, we're never going to get ahead of that. So what I am in favor of is looking at how we make better investments and help people prevent from being in prison versus just doing mandatory sentences and putting more people in prison.
Is there a particular type of sentencing or mandatory sentencing that you specifically don't like? I mean,
no.
For a particular crime or anything like that?
Not at this point. No, there isn't. I just think, again, it's, I understand and respect the citizens have voted those things in, and so you just can't, I don't think you arbitrarily say, well, this works or that doesn't work. You got to go back and look at the long term. We can't afford to just keep putting people in prison if there's another choice. And the other choice is educating people, drug treatment, those types of things that help people prevent being in prison.
John, why do you want to do this? I mean, you've been in public service before. You've been out there in the private sector. What has made you decide, I really want to do this?
Well, it's something that was always, even years ago when I was mayor and city council member, something that I thought about. The timing wasn't right. Certainly the timing wasn't right some cases in relationship to my private sector career and that, because you have to work. This isn't a full-time job. So it didn't work, and then most of the time during those years I supported the people that were in the position, and so there wasn't any reason for me to run. So when this opportunity presented itself, I thought about it long and hard, said it's something I always wanted to do. I believe my experience in my lifetime being here in Springfield has prepared me for it, and I think I can make a contribution, and so would like to do it.
Okay, I'm going to go to our emails here and ask you a question. Is he in favor of ridding the estate tax for families, property owners of 20-plus years, but leaving it in place for flippers, owners of under 5 years?
I guess I haven't considered that. Now, so we're talking about the inheritance tax, or they're talking about
the estate tax.
The estate tax?
Yeah.
Well, the estate tax only applies currently to people with more than $1 million, or $2 million if they're family, and so I don't know that whether they're flippers or otherwise, I don't see any distinction there where I would make any distinction between one or the other.
Well, I guess maybe what he's getting at there is where you have some of these pieces of property that are like century farms and things like that have been in families for a long time.
Sure. Again, at this point, with what I know about it, and again, I'm going to go back to my basic premise is I'm just not in favor of giving up tax resources at the state until we look at what the long-term solution is to making sure there's enough resources to support the program.
Okay. John, would you like to give a website for folks that would like to know more about you? If you want to talk about a couple of things that are coming up briefly, go ahead.
Certainly. So my website is electjohnlively.com, and so we have the information on there of kind of the issues, who have endorsed me, and those types of things. And you can also follow me on Facebook, which a lot of people do, and I think those are two good sources. And just looking forward to November 6th.
All right. Thank you very much. John Lively, the Democrat, going for House District number 12. Thanks for joining us on the Wake Up Call this morning.
You bet. Thank you.
Coming up, we have news at the top of the hour right here on News Radio 1120 KPNW.